Here's another example, even more up to date.
Here are the basics of how to use glass. This is your touchpad. It runs from your temple to your ear. Tap the touchpad to wake up glass. You should see the display above your line of sight, adjusted to see everything. The home screen shows a clock. This is your timeline. It's a row of cards. Things to the left are happening now or coming up, like the weather, an upcoming flight, or an event in your calendar. You can tap on any card to see more. Swipe down anywhere to go back to the timeline. Cards to the right of the home screen are from the past. For example, messages, videos, or photos. Tap on a photo to share it, and choose one of your friends. Swipe down to go back to standby. And have fun exploring.
All right, I'll go back here so you can watch it again. I'll just turn the sound off and you can see what's going on. If you didn't catch it all, this is shipping from Google. It's called Google Glass. It's shipping only to developers right now, so it's not in production per se. This is an early development model, but it is shipping and it is being used. It started being used by developers about 3 weeks ago. That's a little projector on the front. You adjust it kind of like you do a rear view mirror sort of thing. And what it produces is that little screen that floats out in front of you. It's just called augmented reality because it's not eliminating or altering the real reality like virtual reality does. You're not blocked out. You're, in fact, just adding to the reality that's in front of you. So fuzzed out there so you can see it more clearly is the background of the city where she's standing outside and looking at. But what she's seeing is this screen inside of it, and it can now display anything she wants. They're also kind of interesting because they're using bone technology for transmitting the sound. You'll notice right there she's got nothing in her ears, and yet she's hearing all of this because the earpieces that go around behind her there are simply conducting the sound waves through the bones in her skull and into the inner ear, so she's hearing without having any subtraction of the sound that's otherwise coming into her ears. And by playing with the sides, she's able to manipulate the device. It works actually mostly off a voice command. And so what you're able to do now is to take a video or a still shot and see all that data and information and share it with others while you're walking around, not just from the standpoint of being hands-free, but being able to do it all the time. Now, again, I'm not suggesting this is a job potential, although there's certainly lots of it around it. I'm just trying to show you some examples of things that are possible to do right now. Here's another one. Now, again, if you didn't quite catch that as it went by, here's what you just saw. You saw somebody take a number of photographs of any physical object. They did the little boy, they did this particular scene outside. It just is a handheld camera. You can use the camera that's in your phone, you can use your little digital camera, no special equipment required, no tripods, no fancy motors, nothing. You walk around, you take 30 to 40 photographs of the object you want to model. When you're done, you take all of those photos and you upload them, and what you get back is a 3D model, which is what you're seeing here. So this is not a photograph. This is a three-dimensional model with the imagery of the outside of the building mapped on top of it. When you were looking at the little boy, if you didn't catch it, I think we can get this to go back here. Yeah, see this here? Whoops. There. That's not a photograph. If you look carefully, it's a little bit pixelated or a little bit deformed around some of the finer edges, because this is a three-dimensional model. Now, what I'm going to put that together with is that after we've scanned this in, so think about what this means now. This means I can, by taking a bunch of pictures of any physical object, I can now have it instantly converted into a three-dimensional model that I have on the screen to play with. Why would I want to do that? Well, how about this? Let me show you. Where am I? Here.
What we're doing over here.
So what we're doing is we're looking at our 123D Creature iPad app, and this lets you basically sketch out a creature, texture him, sculpt him, anything you want. We're providing the tools to create that 3D model that you eventually fabricate and make real.
So these are all things that you created on that app and you were able to print out here.
That's right, yeah.
This all came from an app. Part of something they're calling the Makers Movement.
So what you're watching there is what's known as a 3D printer. So what 3D printers do is really just what 2D printers do, with one slight exception. They add the third dimension, the Z dimension, and they're able to move the printer head not just X and Y, but up and down. Then we change from using ink to changing some solid kind of material, wax, plastic, some kinds of ceramics, paper, stainless steel is able to be done now, sintered bronze is able to be done now. You take the model that we just photographed, so I'm putting the two pieces together now. We take the model we did with maybe that kind of capturing, scanning thing, we take that model of that little boy's head, and we hit the print button. And what the printer does is prints the actual object, all right? So now we have a model that's able to be produced as a 3D object out of one of these 3D printers. Now what this is capable of doing then is quite fascinating. Let me go back here and show you some examples. Here's some examples out of 3D printers. You can see we can just play around and have fun, but you can see some of the complexity we do, because the printer doesn't care where it stops and starts and what it lays down and what it leaves for spaces. It's able to print things of any kind. We can use old technology. These are two rings. This is the wax version that we have printed out of it after we've got the modeling done for it. Then we send it and put it into ceramic, so it's all surrounded. We melt the wax out the same way we've been making jewelry for 100 years or making other forms, and you pour in gold, platinum, titanium, whatever you want, and you get the finished ring out that can be then worked on and produced as the real thing. The difference is we can produce these to be any shape we want. There's no cost for complexity and uniqueness. It's the same cost to produce one and only one thing and to produce 1,000,000 of them exactly the same. And most of the time, especially if it was something like a ring, you'd probably want it to be unique and matching you or the situation, and you can have that. The other two parts up there are interesting because they're assemblies. I think I grabbed some shots like these ones, all right? So Nike is using 3D printing more and more and starting to enable you to not just design your own shoe as they've been doing for a while, but to print it as well. So when you're finished designing it, you hit print and it gets printed out and you put it on your foot. On the bottom here, this is just a prototype because this is out of plastic. The printers right now, one of their biggest limitations is material. We just don't have a lot of materials that can be printed in a 3D printer. I'll liken it to you. Most of you are probably almost as old as me and can remember when printing first came along, two-dimensional printers. And you remember tractor feed paper and thermal printing, and it took forever just to get one page, but Mel, you were so impressed and excited by that one piece of paper when it came out of there with all the little dot matrix thermal things burned onto it. It's about where we're at with 3D printing. The equivalent to color that came along later with printing is materials when it comes to 3D printing, adding more and more capability to have materials of any kind. So this, while it's plastic, you can see is a pretty good-looking prototype that the Bosch company uses. And the reason I grabbed this one to show you is this is how it comes out of the printer. No assembly required. It's a working, functioning model. All the levers work, all the stuff inside of there is there, the motor's there, it turns, it works, it's the real thing. Because the printer doesn't care. It prints whatever you tell it. It knows what a space is. It picks up different materials and prints it out in one piece, at one time, in one pass. Size is one of our limitations, but already we're doing things the size of jet engines. Right now, to be clear for you, it's printing the prototypes. It's just printing the models of that. It's not printing, in most cases, the finished parts, although jet turbine engines are being produced, the blades and so on, with 3D printing technology. Again, let me emphasize, my point is to not be showing you that this is where the jobs are in manufacturing. I'm saying start to understand what you're watching. And this is today. I'm not making this up. This is what the companies are doing right now with the abilities that 3D printing gives us. Not quite interesting enough for you? We'll try this. Now we've got 3D printers printing human and other animal organs. They take and develop a culture of human tissue. If it's a human issue, they take yours, so there's now 0 rejection rate, and they print the organ with the 3D printer. It's printed 3-dimensionally and individually because it has to be just for you, both size-wise and function-wise and matching with your other physical situation and conditions, having no rejection capacity because it's built from cells that you originated to grow the culture of the tissue to begin with. That's what he's holding in the hand, is the finished one. It's not going to be available for transplants anytime real soon. This is certainly in the level of being done in the medical labs that we're talking about, but this is being done. They're producing these things already. In addition to that, I can't really do this one with examples. We can also 3D print food. We can 3D print food because anything we can provide to the print heads of the 3D printer can be printed out. Right now, it's somewhat limited. Easy to do things are chocolate, for example. You can now print using chocolate because it's easy to print and supply to that printer head. Let me give you a situation or an example, though, of how this might be applied. And I want to show you 2 things that I talked to the students about, because what's the most interesting example to this 3D printing stuff to me is that it just takes a little bit of shift in your thinking to do a very profound transformation of 2 things I'm going to highlight for you. But here's the story I'll give you as an example. I can right now, today, sit down and with that little camera that's on my phone or in my pocket, I can take a picture of a coffee cup. Just go around, take about 30 to 40 pictures, send it up to the cloud. It comes back as a 3-dimensional model. I probably want to adjust it a little bit to fit my hands and the shape that I like. I just mush and move it around as a 3-dimensional model. I hit the print button and out it comes out the other side. Now, I might want that coffee cup, but Ray might want that coffee cup actually, but Ray and I are no longer sitting together or even in close proximity to each other. I'm back on the boat. All I need to do, so Ray, here's a scenario for you. We're having a Skype conversation. We've got the video working. Ray happens to see me drinking the coffee, goes, hey, hold it. Where'd you get that coffee mug? That's a really cool coffee mug. I'd like to have one of those. No problem. Click, 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 take the pictures, grab the model, send her the file. She hits print on her end, and out comes the coffee cup out of her printer. Already now we're able to do 3D printing, so to speak, of materials like food, as I mentioned, and coffee's one of them. So she can now take the 3D printed mug she just printed out, and she can put it underneath the other faucet that she's got for 3D printing of food, and select and tell it whatever coffee she'd like, and it's now filled up with coffee. I would tell you that within 5 to 10 years, your kitchen, well, if it's your kitchen, probably maybe as much as 15 years, but in the recent future, nearby future, it's highly probable, in my opinion, you're going to have a tap on the wall that produces any liquid you ask for. Because go back to the movie of moving the atoms. As we start to be able to manipulate things at that atomic level, we can create any substance we want. And every liquid and every material is just a combination of atoms. So now all I got to do is sample the coffee she likes, or she builds it herself and tells me what she wants. We put it together, and out of the tap comes whatever liquid that you would like to have. Now, I'm telling you all of this because I would just like you to see that already now, this kind of capacity is there, and here's the 2 changes of thinking I want to tell you about. We used to talk about teleportation, you know, the beam me up Scotty thing from Star Trek and Star Wars sort of stuff, and we're still waiting for that, we think. Not anymore. Think about what you just saw. Change the thinking a little bit. The way we got trained by Star Trek to think about teleportation was that you had to take the atoms of the actual object, break them down somehow, transmit them somehow, assemble them again somehow, hopefully correctly, especially if it was me or one of us that was being beamed to the other place, and then you'd have them there. But just change your thinking a little bit. Why do we want to insist that it's the exact same molecules that got moved? Why move the molecules when there's no need to? When you send a document to somebody and they print it out at the other end, you didn't send them the physical document. You didn't send them the atoms of ink and paper. You sent them the information that was in the file that contained that document. You sent that to them and they printed it out and they had the document in their hands or on the screen. Therefore, we've got teleportation as 3D printing develops itself because we've got the capacity to send any object, not its atoms, but the object nonetheless, to anybody that wants it. My point is not the 3D printing and the object and teleportation. My point is Just being able to see this kind of things. Remember I told you 7 years or so is about how long it is something's been around before you actually see it and become aware of it. So as the students and yourselves start to see things like this, doing that mental flipping, doing that, what would I do with that? What does that really mean? And being open to changing our thinking, like the example of teleportation, is something that we're going to have to be able to do more and more often because the rate of change is exponential. The other piece that goes with this is that it also brings a notion of self-replication. Would you be interested to know, for example, that when you buy one of these 3D printers, and right now there's one of them that's under $1,000, so they're following that kind of same price production. There are certainly ones that cost over $1 million, but those ones, by the way, are available to you as a service. So if you develop something and you want to print it and you don't have a printer at home that's good enough to print that out, you send the file to one of these companies just like you do to 1 Hour Photo Mart, where you used to drop off your pictures. Now you drop off the file, it gets sent back to you as the real object. Well, what this means then is that in addition to the teleportation model that I was talking to you about, this means now we've also got the capacity to do self-replication. The printers that are shipping right now come with all the files to print all the parts that make up the printer. So you can now use your printer to print another printer. Now, the reason the companies have done this is very interesting. One, they just want people to play with it and modify it and change it and see how things get developed. Secondly, 2 of the companies have already had to email their customers and say to them, you know, we can't keep up with manufacturing enough of these printers to be able to meet the demand. So we're wondering if you might have the time and willingness, and we'll pay you, if you would print a bunch of parts for us. You've already got the files, we ship them with the printer, and we need part 183 and 184 and 186, and we need as many of them as can print. And so the customers now start printing them out and sending them back to the manufacturer. And that's the kind of thing I want to highlight to you and to your children, is that this kind of fundamental shift of business models. I mean, think about this. This means anything I can. You think music is a problem with copying and replicating and distributing? What do you do now when anybody with a camera can copy any physical object? Your glasses, your coffee cup, the chair you're sitting in, the table, the car you're about to ride home in. And click, 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 turn it into a model, modify it a little bit, hit print, and we've got the model. We've got the actual product. Now, we're a ways away from that happening with every object and certainly things of scale. Although, by the way, I could show you some other examples here. We're printing buildings now. Where is that one? Well, here, I'll show you a few things out here. We're printing clothing, all right? So this is a dress that's been 3D printed. We're printing ears already, all right? Again, that human tissue thing, but printing ears for people, particularly in burn victims that need that. This guy has got a company he started up that's 3D printing the entire car, not just parts of it. Here's some examples of 3D printed houses and homes and buildings, where you can do entire walls and be able to print that out. And again, no cost for uniqueness, no cost for complexity. It's just as easy to print one thing one time. Prosthetics, another huge area being influenced dramatically by the use in the medical profession in general. The organs, dentistry, in terms of the replication of the teeth and so on. I'm just trying to feed you some examples so that on the drive home, one of the reasons I gave you the warning, I've been told you shouldn't drive within 30 minutes after listening to Wayne, because suddenly something will go, oh yeah, that's what he was talking about, and it'll be too interesting to think about to be able to keep your eyes on the road. In any case, what I'm hoping to do and show you is this perspective, as I offered to you to begin with, of both how quickly things are changing, and right now, not, well, maybe one day. This has been going on for quite some time. It's just getting faster, better, and cheaper, like all things tend to do. And the question now becomes, what does this do for me as a consumer, as an employer, as an employee, as just a person living on the planet with these kind of capabilities and that capacity to think differently? Okay. How are we doing for time? I'm going to wrap up as fast as I can here and just let us have some questions so you can recover from the stunned silence that usually follows my talks and ask some questions. I told a story that I got asked to repeat tonight by several people, and that was I had the great fortune 25 years ago or so to be around Sting, the musician, when he was being interviewed. And he said one of the most profound things that have stuck with me ever since. At the time, Moog synthesizers were big. And I see a few people with hair like the color of mine that might remember those things. And they were not being well received by the music, cognosci, all right? This was not real music. Real musicians played real instruments, and that was real music. And Sting was already, although early in his career, regarded as this very talented, capable musician and composer. And the interviewer thought he knew the answer to the question when he asked Sting, you don't think much of this stuff, right? I mean, it's just a bunch of nonsense. I've heard you playing around with it, but you just wanted to prove how silly and stupid it is, right? And Sting said, no, I think it's one of the greatest things that's ever happened in my life. And the interviewer's stunned, and he goes, well, you're going to have to explain this to me. You're such a talented musician. What do you want with these fake music machines? And he gave this incredible answer, that all his life, music had somehow come into his head. Didn't know how, didn't know why, not fully formed, he had to work on it and stuff, but it was in his head. And his fundamental problem all his life was his wrists. He couldn't get the music out. And that's why he played so many instruments. He tried to learn all the instruments he could because he had to get that sound, that music, that song out. And he could never do it well enough to keep him happy. It was always songs in his head that didn't come out the right way or didn't sound the right thing. And his point was that these machines eliminate the blockage at my wrists. I like it because I think it's now true not for musicians, it's true for every one of us. That this inability for us to execute our ideas and what we can imagine and not have to live with mass-produced things that were made for somebody else in a one-size-fits-all and have something that's just uniquely designed for us because we're, in that sense, the designer and the manufacturer when these kind of capacities come along. And I think thinking of what that means in the world of work, and for all of us, no matter what your age is, but certainly for people entering the workforce now, is a fundamental set of trends that are going to drive where the value proposition of employers and employees is going to come from. And it's not in hand-level kinds of skills. Did I put this on here? Yeah. Here's an example. I'm not suggesting these are the 6 or in any other way, shape, or form. This is what the skill sets of the future are. But it's an example that'll get you, I think, on the right track. This is actually from a book by Daniel Pink about 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago called A Whole New Mind. And what he talks about in the book is the need to start to both develop an ambidextrous mind, i.e. both the right and the left side working well. But in particular, what I've got from the book and from my chats with him afterwards was this need to start to understand that from a job perspective, most of the jobs are migrating from left-hand brain kinds of skills to right-hand brain kinds of skills. Simple examples, and so you can see him highlighting things like design, and you can see that showing up in what I've showed you. But the point being that we all become, in one context or another, designers. Not capital D designers necessarily, that's our job, that's on our business card, but designers in the sense that we're the ones that are involved more and more deeply with coming up with designing these things that we're going to have and that we're going to use. Furthermore, he goes on to talk about things like how we're automating almost all of the left brain functions of the brain, or of the human capacity. Things like analysis are all being done automatically. I worked for Autodesk for 25 years, makes AutoCAD and does computer design stuff. And the world of engineering was one of the worlds that I lived in all of that time. Now, engineers historically have been analysts. They've been the ones that have been analyzing the problem, developing things around what materials can do and how to put those right materials in the right place at the right time, the right shape, the radius to have, what size the bearing needs to be, how large the shaft is going to be before it breaks. All that stuff is automated. All that stuff's being done automatically. We use things like finite element analysis that will tell you after 10,000 pushes on the brake pedal, what's the brake pedal, where's it going to break if it's going to break? And then you can change the design accordingly. Now, what that does is not just eliminate that job. What it gets replaced by, or where the human value proposition comes in, is in synthesis. Being able to take huge amounts of data and information, see patterns, see trends, and take the analysis that you're getting quickly and automatically from these other things and be able to develop those and put them together. So I'm suggesting to you that this kind of way of thinking about where do I need to focus my energies and my time to develop myself educationally is a much more appropriate thing to do going forward to ensure employability than to focus on continuing with more of the left brain development and orientations. I'm going to finish up. I'll give you this thing here. I'll tell you one story quickly and then I'll take some questions. Actually, let me reverse that. I'll put the story in if I've got some time. Let me just open it up so we can get some of your questions and comments and make sure you've got that much time. Yes, sir. Turns out not. Apparently, I think, I don't, the answer is I don't know. It would be the most honest answer for me to give you in terms of, I'm not going to suggest I know the details. My understanding from working with some of those folks is that there's some combination of the use of stem cells, which, if I'm following the understanding, is this quite universal material from a tissue perspective, and so that stem cells are capable of being, at least tissue subplants that we develop, are capable of taking on that purpose. Secondly, they've told me that they can have the organ be trained to take on its capacity by the ability of putting that shape together, or that combination in there, and that as they start to energize that, it understands through the DNA structure, because the cells that they use in part are going to be based from kidney cells of yours to begin with, okay? So it's already in that context got the DNA specifics that understand that this is a kidney cell, or this part of the kidney cell, and now, because of the 3D printing capacity to just put whatever one that wants in the right spot, it puts the right pieces in the right place, and then it becomes and takes on that particular function. So again, let me repeat, I don't pretend to understand the specifics. I will tell you they are already, however, printing them and putting them into laboratory animals and things of that nature, and that they're working. I don't know how successfully. Of course, they will never, as usual, give you an estimate of when would we see the first human use of this stuff. My point is still that it's happening, right? And that at least it's got that kind of promise to it. What else? Yeah. Well, at a meta level, I'll certainly suggest that, I think history's shown us very clearly that every time some immense capability and innovation comes along, it brings with us the good side and the bad side, right? And so everything from electricity to fire to machinery has that kind of thing, and I think this will be no different. And so your question's a very good one in the sense that this isn't, I hope I'm not sounding too Pollyannish by pointing out just the optimistic or the positive uses of it, and it's going to introduce some huge questions, societal level questions over what's the appropriate use of this and how do we use this stuff so that it does produce things well. I will suggest to you it's got some good promise to it already. For example, with 3D printing, most of the materials that are being used suddenly now take on a recycling capacity that we've never had before, because now we just either melt it back down or reuse it in other ways, especially as we start to get at the molecular level. Then all we need to do is be able to take something back down to its molecular level and then reconstitute it into some other form. So from the standpoint of recycling and reuse, the potential, at least, for that to go. I'm sure we're going to see horrible misuse of this, just like how this supposed paperless society of ours seems to be consuming paper at a rate that we've never even seen before. And you see things which I happen to personally regard, no guilt allowed in the room, of people printing emails, all right? Zubet and I have discussions over it. Really? You want to print the flight schedule? Seriously? When it's on the phone and I just scan my phone when I go through the thing. So I look after tickets and she comes along for the ride, fortunately, and we don't print out as many tickets as we used to. But I'm suggesting to you that kind of capacity to reuse. The other thing is efficiency rates go up dramatically, all right? Think about the energy being consumed to do 3D printing of things. Now, we do have to be careful because we're printing one thing at a time and factories are producing hundreds, thousands, or millions at a time. But even when you do that math, the reduction in energy consumption through these kinds of models is orders of magnitude less, not a 10% improvement. So I think if I can ever do a short answer, the short answer would be that it has a potential to show, I believe, order of magnitudes improvement over the world we have right now, but it absolutely brings with it the capacity for, I'll tell you right now, if you haven't read this, or if you start after tonight looking at 3D printing, one of the very first things that's going to come up on your searches is what? Who knows? What's getting 3D printed right now, which is a real big problem, especially in the country just south of you? Guns. Right. Actually, not guns in a whole sense, because they're not printing metal ones too well, but they're printing the firing pins and the pieces that it takes to otherwise render a rifle from a single shot to an automatic or semi-automatic. Okay. So, and just as an example of absolutely, it's going to be technology is agnostic as to who's using it and what their purpose is. And it's going to allow people to use it for some horrible, horrible things, and we'll have those instances. I personally think that, as usual, they'll be the vast, tiny little minority, hugely disruptive, but the minority, and we'll continue to do what we've always done, and that is to find ways to minimize that, whether that's through laws, regulation, education, or whatever else. So I think it's more important than ever that we worry about this, because the capacity that these things have I'm sure that the more you think about this, the more you'll kind of go, ooh, ooh, whoa, both in an excited sense and oh my gosh. So I tell people all the time, if you're not equal parts scared and excited, you're not paying attention. What else? It's a great comment. One of the trends I'll suggest not in an oxymoronic fashion, although I'm a walking oxymoron, but in the standpoint of kind of this inverse juxtaposition that's facing us as we go forward. What I mean by that is most people today, probably yourself included, I'm guessing, have a sense that the world's getting more complicated, and from a career perspective, we need more specialization. We need people that are more and more specialized with just the capacity to do these very specific, very specialized things. And I'm going to tell you the opposite is happening. And that if you think about it, again, it's that kind of flip thinking sort of thing I was telling you about before, but with the teleportation, for example, and so on. So while the world is getting more complex and more complicated, one could argue, if you think about it from the job perspective, it's gone past this tipping point on an exponential curve to the point where it's impossible for anybody to specialize, because by the time they got the specialization, it would be gone. And something else would be there that we needed people to be able to work and think within. Therefore, your comment about teaching people and understanding, and all of us getting a capacity to learn and develop new skills, including, by the way, one of the biggest challenges, especially for those of us a bit older, is unlearning, right? Being able to get rid of habits and assumptions and ways of thinking that we've grown up with and spent all our life with, or society has formed over that period of time, and reducing those and turning them around. Yes, and that's going to get worse, isn't it, as we see this kind of exponential rate of change. And therefore, something I put up on the slide and just didn't erase kind of by quickly, one of the ways I've captured that notion is I think the fundamental capacity we all need is readiness for the unexpected. What I mean by that is that if you follow these arguments, if you believe this rate of exponential change is happening and is going to continue on that curve, what it says is you can't be ready for anything. Or said another way, you have to be ready for everything. Now, what does that mean specifically? It means, for example, some of that flattening of the org chart I talked to you about. It means that project teams can't be kept together because they rarely ever do the same project again. And I hear that again and again and again. We've never seen a situation like this, whether that's medical stuff, whether that's military stuff, whether that's just day-to-day stuff in business. And therefore, what I come to conclude is that it means that we have to be ready for what we didn't expect to come along. Well, what does that mean? How are you ready for the unexpected? I told a story at the assembly that I'll repeat because I think it illustrates it. So I had the great privilege to talk with Scully Scullenberg just after, if you remember, that's the pilot that landed the American Airlines jet in the Hudson River. All right, came into land, hit a couple of birds, took out a whole engine, needed to make an emergency landing. The ATC controllers wouldn't allow him because they didn't have the runways clear at the time. They said, take another run around, make another circle, and come back in and we'll have it cleared. He said, I can't do that. I don't have enough fuel. They said, oh, yeah, we've calculated it. You're fine. He said, no, trust me. I'm the pilot of this plane. I can't make it around. It will not have enough fuel to do so. So he made the call to land it in the Hudson River. If you've been to New York, you can appreciate how brave or stupid that was in terms of the traffic. This there was about, as I recall, 7 or 8 in the morning, so a fairly peak time. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is when I talked to him, one of my questions to him was, so tell me, how many hours of training did you have doing water landings? And his answer was 0, none. And I said, well, how did you do that then? How did you know? And this is what's part of what's sometimes called, Malcolm Gladwell did a great book writing about this, called, there's a trend or a pattern that's emerged that it would appear that 10,000 hours is about what it takes to acquire expertise in something. And I don't remember how many Scully had. It was something like 18,000, but he certainly was well over the 10,000. The point I'm trying to get at is, with that example, was he was not trained. He was not ready for water landings. That's not an option. That's not something you think about doing, all right? And it's very different if you're doing that at sea in open spaces and that kind of stuff and those emergencies. But to do it in what he did, he had no training, no preparation, none of that sort of stuff. And the answer is, oh, look, they made a mistake at flight school, then we better add that to the syllabus. No, because I could go on now to list thousands of other situations, and I still miss some that I couldn't think of that were going to happen. The World Trade Center is an example of unexpected things happening in a very horrible way, obviously. And people want to talk about, see, we should have been ready. We should have seen that coming. No, you shouldn't have. It's not something that you can predict, because the combinations and the things that are happening, that what one mind can come up with, is not something we can suggest we can be ready for. So to be ready for the unexpected is to have a more generalized set of skills. Like, guess what? What you said, I can think. I can solve problems. I can do it without being stressed out. I can do it without thinking, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. This has never been seen before. And get used to it's never been seen before, and that being the norm, and that you've got skills that are more fundamental ones. And guess what? They're not that new. Problem-solving skills, being able to think in a synthesized way of putting things together, connecting dots, seeing patterns. That kind of capacity is what's going to be required, I think, from more and more people. I mean, take a few seconds more to think about what we saw in 3D printing today and imagine what that's going to decimate the labor force over time.